Legion, it's Hadrian. Thank you for being here, and welcome back to Strategy School in Civilization 6 Rise and Fall. Don't forget to check out the series overview if you're just watching for the very first time. What this video is going to cover is primarily city-states and why I was so excited to meet Toronto at the end of the last episode, let alone, well, I was excited to meet a city-state, but I was especially excited to meet Toronto. So we'll talk about that in just a second, but I'm also going to play through a few turns until we meet the first Barbarian Scout, and typically they start pretty close to you in Civilization 6 because the game likes to give you something to do early on. So when we encounter our first scout, we're going to talk about how barbarians are different in Civilization 6. You might have heard that they're a little bit more frustrating. You might have already experienced that they're a little bit more frustrating. So we'll talk about what to do when you have that moment of meeting the first scout and how to react and what are some of the best ways to deal with that early game threat in Civilization 6 specifically. First, why was I excited about Toronto? So you might remember that we had a notification down here in the bottom right saying that because we were the first major civilization to meet Toronto, we got an envoy for free with Toronto. And you might also, if you're very keen, notice that we have a new button up here. Because we let a turn go, well, actually it's because I reloaded the game, but if you let a turn go by, the UI will update with any new elements that correspond to something new that has happened in your game. So now we have the city-states button available to us, which wasn't there immediately after we met Toronto in the previous recording. And it's showing us that we have one envoy with Toronto. Notice what that gives us. Automatically, +2 production in the capital, Uruk, when producing wonders, buildings, and districts. That's why I was happy. There are 6 different types of city-states in Civilization 6. There are industrial city-states like Toronto, trade city-states, militaristic, religious, scientific, and cultural. And yes, they all generally associate with a specific yield and are color-coded to that yield. So Toronto is kind of this umber, brown, orange color that corresponds to production. And as a result of having one envoy with Toronto, we have a production bonus. One thing I'll note is that the military city-state type that I mentioned, which is of course color-coded in red, is also a production bonus city-state, but it is focused on units, not wonders, buildings, and districts. So there's a slight difference there, but for the most part, they're just color-coded to the yield that they boost. So in order to gain the favor of a city-state and reap the rewards that they grant to your yields, you need to obtain influence over city-states. And this is done a couple of different ways. Primarily, you're sending always you're sending diplomatic envoys to gain influence over city-states. And you can earn envoys by either completing quests for city-states, which are indicated by this little marker here. Toronto wants us to send them a trade route, which will present me with an interesting choice. Once I've finished Code of Laws, I can get to foreign trade at some point. I might not go straight to foreign trade next. Sometimes you might, if you want to go that route. Or you might want to go for military tradition as soon as possible. We'll talk about the reasons for that choice when that choice is upon us. But once we have the trader unlocked, I might have another city by that point. So do I trade with Toronto and send a trader that direction and build a road that way? Or do I trade with my other city and help that city grow or produce a little bit faster by establishing a trade route? Or help my capital grow by establishing a trade route with the new city? What do I do? Maybe I'll put another city over here by Toronto and these horses. That way we can kind of kill 2 birds with 1 stone and have a road heading that direction that will eventually benefit both. Have a road heading to Toronto that will also help my units get to my city over here. That's one particular strategy, but that's an interesting choice. Not every city-state quest is going to present to you with a choice like that, but that's just something off the top of my head that might happen to you when you are going for another envoy and want to complete a city-state quest. You might have to make more of a sacrifice than you might realize. That's one way to earn additional envoys and increase this count here. Another way is, and this is how you'll earn the vast majority of envoys, influence points. And this is actually shown up here in a very small aspect of the interface next to the other per empire, per turn yields. And I say per empire because these are empire-wide yields as opposed to like food and production, which are very city-specific and don't pool in any way. So notice that we currently have 0 envoys. This is where you'll see how many you've earned to allocate to other city-states. So you want to keep an eye on this number because the game doesn't always notify you when you have some ready, especially later on. That might change as the game continues to be added to and patched and expanded, but for now it doesn't always tell you when this number has gone up, especially again later on. But we are currently earning 1 influence point per turn, and as you can see, governments and policies are the primary source of influence points. So we, in several turns, once we're in the classical age, will have our first tier 1 government once we have political philosophy finished. And whether we're an autocracy, an oligarchy, or a classical republic doesn't matter, we will gain an additional 3 influence points per turn. But we may also have the ability to put in another policy, which allows us to increase the influence per turn even farther. So there are some things to consider there as well, and there are definitely ways to manipulate this. Just as there are a number of ways to manipulate the yields of tiles to your benefit, there are additional ways as you play through the game to gain bonus envoys. So look out for any choice that you can make in any aspect of the game that affects influence or envoys, because those are all going to be about playing the city-state game. Now, when it comes to playing the city-state game, there are 3 tiers of bonuses, Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3, which any player can obtain as long as they're not at war with the city-state. Tier 1 bonuses we already have, and that is just a bonus to the capital that you get automatically. Tier 2 bonuses require 3 envoys, and you get production in every city with a specific district with a specific building. So you not only have to have the corresponding district, so for an industrial city-state, you would need an industrial district. For a military city-state, you would need an encampment district. And a special building, a basic building inside that district. You would need to have those things built in order to get the second bonus, on top of having the envoys necessary for that bonus. And then finally, for the Tier 3 bonus, you would need to have that district and a more advanced building built, in addition to the envoys required. And it's always 1, 3, or 6. And by the way, no matter how many civilizations are in the game, everybody gets these benefits right here. Even if everyone has 6 envoys with Toronto, there's no such thing as competition when it comes to these. There is competition when it comes to being the suzerain overlord of the city-state, which is a topic we're going to cover when we actually get to that point. That's a slightly different type of bonus. It is competitive. It's based on whoever is the first to 3 envoys, this number right here, and then whoever maintains the highest number, which is always shown right here in the same way that these numbers are displayed in this corner. Whoever maintains the highest number of envoys at that city-state will remain suzerain for the rest of the game. And again, that's a separate set of bonuses, which we'll talk about later on, and that is competitive. These are not. That's my point in bringing that up. You can have as many civilizations as you can imagine with 1, 3, or 6 envoys at Toronto. Everyone will get the same benefits as long as Toronto remains a free city-state. The only way that you might lose those benefits, there are a couple of ways. If you decided, first of all, screw you, Toronto, I'm going to declare war on you and have you as one of my cities, you can do that. You can conquer city-states in Civilization 6 and actually make them a normal city. But the second you do that, first of all, while you're at war with them, the second you've declared war, they will kill all your envoys or fire your envoys, however you want to put it. They're gone. You can't earn them back. They don't come back to your city like spies do. Whether you're familiar with the spying system in the game already or not, just know the envoys don't return. If they are reduced by any means, they're gone. You can't get them back and then put them somewhere else later on. So if you declare war on Toronto or any other city-state for that matter, those envoys will die. If another city-state, if another civilization is suzerain overlord of Toronto or another city-state that you're trying to influence with a certain number of envoys, and they declare war on you, the civilization does. Yes, that city-state will declare war on you as well, but because you are not directly responsible for the war, and they are simply joining the war out of obligation to their overlord, they will not kill your envoys, but you will not get your bonuses while that war is ongoing. So those are some different ways that the envoys can be either taken away or their effect nullified due to war. So just be aware of that. Also, spies can fabricate scandals at city-states, reducing the number of envoys at the target city-state, and governors can be installed to instantly provide the equivalent of 2 extra envoys. I say governors, plural. It's actually just one governor, and that's Amani. Her messenger ability allows you to instantly gain 2 more envoys as long as she is stationed at a city-state. We'll talk about governors much later on, but my point is that there are additional ways for you to play the envoy game, both by reducing the number of envoys belonging to other civilizations using spies, and by increasing the number of envoys by installing governors. That's especially handy early on if you use Amani to your advantage. So again, you can conquer a city-state outright. One thing I want to note about that, if you were to succeed in your war against Toronto, if you did that, or any other city-state, it would just become a normal city. You wouldn't magically get the bonuses of Toronto while also owning it. It would just become a city to you. And so you actually lose the benefits of having that city-state under your influence, and it just becomes a city. Yes, having that city is useful, but it's just a city. If you had another city nearby and the benefits of Toronto for your entire empire, isn't that a little bit better? Just something to think about. Speaking of that, if you're playing on higher difficulty level especially, but even if you're not, you should be prepared to defend city-states that you're interested in keeping the benefits from, because especially when you're playing on higher level, the AI loves to conquer them. They even had to do some stuff in recent patches to make it a little bit harder for the AI to do it, and they still do it. Emperor level or higher AI will try to kill city-states, period. So just be aware that that is something that's going to occur. So, having gone over the basics of that and the Envoy system, let's now play for a few turns and go over some of the other things going on until we encounter our first Barbarian Scout. So it's saying that a unit needs orders. That's because our builder hasn't had anything to do yet. We gained this builder for free from the goody hut that was right here, the tribal village. And notice that it is recommending, the game will always recommend to you what the best improvement is to build. You can follow these recommendations if you want, but really what you need to be aware of is what tiles are being worked, what benefits you most want to reap based on playing the tile game. The less you are letting the game automate, the more you understand yourself, the better off you'll be as a player. So just focus on that as a learning objective from the get-go. You don't want to lean on the game's recommendations too hard, whether it's recommendations for city settlement, recommendations for improvements, whatever. Like I said in the series overview, we are not going to play to Gilgamesh's strengths in this series because I want the series to play out like an average playthrough, so it doesn't matter who you're playing as in your game, you can learn something from this. So I think if we were to go more towards Gilgamesh's strengths, it would be a little bit harder to relate this playthrough to a playthrough as a completely different leader. So normally I would go ahead and build the ziggurat here as Gilgamesh because these are both on a river. And look, if you build the ziggurat, it's +2 science, but also if it's next to a river, it's +1 culture. So we would actually get substantial science benefits and culture benefits from building the ziggurats. Normally I would do that if I was playing to Gilgamesh's benefits. For the purpose of this tutorial, we're not going to do that. And actually, I'm not going to do anything with this builder right now because until we have a worker, we only have one worker at the moment. And that worker is there. The next worker is coming in 3 turns and they will go there, period. And then the next worker after that, because this tile is going to be within our city soon, they'll probably go to the sheep tile because that is a 2 food, 2 production tile. So none of these tiles are going to be improvable for a while. The builder has nothing to do. So we're going to put them to sleep until such time as we need them. And let's go to the next turn. Okay, so you know what? I told myself I was going to keep this off. I switched to another. Let's clear this. Confirm. I don't want to get ahead of myself. Sometimes when you have that turned on, you can start moving through turns really quickly. And I wanted to turn it off for the tutorial series. We're going to keep it off. So I'm going to go ahead and ford this river because I do want to investigate whether or not there are barbarians near these horses. It doesn't appear that there are. That's good news. All right, let's go ahead and scout. First here, we're going to go 1 tile at a time because I don't want to necessarily piss off another civilization if I meet them. Let's move down here. Okay, no scouts yet, and I don't see signs of any civilization borders. Our city is about to grow, so we're going to have more food and production, and our scout's going to be ready, which is great news. So now we have a new production choice at Uruk. Now we got a builder for free, so normally we might be thinking about a builder since we have these units coming in. But again, even if we didn't have the free builder, think about what I just said a moment ago. When our 3rd citizen is done in 4 turns, they're going to be working this tile up here. And the thing is, I can't improve any of those tiles yet. So do I really need a builder yet? Probably not. If I felt like I was under threat from barbarians or another civilization that I'd already met on turn 5, which is unlikely, but barbarians may be more likely than another civilization. But if I felt like I was under threat, period, I could go ahead and start building military units. Again, we're not playing to Gilgamesh's strengths, but we could go for the war cart if we were. And I might do a war cart just to demonstrate heavy cavalry stuff, but we're not going to go straight for this. What I would actually like to do, because we got the free builder and we don't have to worry about that for now, we need to catch up in our culture generation as quickly as possible. Building a monument will give us 2 additional culture. 1 for the building's core benefits, and because the city's at full loyalty, we'll get more culture on top of that. It'll be done in 4 turns. We're getting the building bonus from Toronto. So let's go ahead and get that going. And then in the same number of turns, this is always something that you want to happen if you can help it, because, well, it really only matters for the first citizen. So it applied a moment ago for the scout, doesn't so much apply now. But it's nice when these numbers match, when you have your first population in a city and you're moving towards your second, which we now have, because that means that when your first production project is done, whatever it is, your second citizen will be ready. And as soon as your second citizen is ready, you can train a settler. You need 2 citizens in a city in order to train a settler, because it reduces the city's population by 1 when you train one. So just be aware of that. That's something that you'll have to bear in mind. But it's nice when these numbers match. So but in this case, it's just more of an aesthetic thing. In 4 turns, we're going to have both our 3rd citizen and the monument's going to be done. So we're going to have a lot more culture per turn. Let's go ahead and see what we can do with our scout. I think I do want to have the scout ford the river here. So again, we get a magic free movement point because the scout started in the capital. So we don't have to worry about using more than 1 movement point or using 3 movement points to cross the river, as we previously discussed. And I'm actually going to stand up on top of the hill tile because look what happens when you have the high ground. You will uncover a little bit more territory. All right, let's continue to move south 1 tile at a time. Notice that I am starting to get a little far away from Uruk. Okay, there's our first Barbarian Scout. They're decently far away, which is good news. I'm not really concerned about them, but this is an opportunity to talk about Barbarians before we close the episode. So why do you need to react to Barbarians as soon as you see a Scout? What's going on? Let's first talk about the way Barbarian Outposts work in Civ 6. Outposts are going to spawn on land on any tile that's in the fog of war. So as long as it's not visible to our cities or our units, it is eligible as a spawn point for a Barbarian encampment. So it's advantageous to you as you plan on where you're going to be building your cities. Think in terms of building cities that are close enough together so that not only their loyalty overlaps, which is another topic entirely, but also so that there's no fog of war between them and you can't have barbarians spawning in places that could potentially be dangerous for your civilization. There are 3 types of encampments, and the type is determined by where the encampment spawns. If, for instance, it spawns near horses, it'll be a cavalry encampment and spawn horse units, which are a lot harder to fight early on. If you know that there's a cavalry encampment nearby and they don't know you're there yet, you want to kill that thing as soon as possible because it's going to be hard to fight back against if they discover your presence. Also, there will be the naval type. If they spawn on a coastal tile, they'll spawn ships, which can be particularly frustrating as you may be required to build a navy to fend off the units spawned by these camps. Even if the units are on water, there is a particular type of naval unit that can fire onto land, including naval barbarian units. So just be aware of the fact that you might have to build a navy. You might have to go ahead and build that coastal beachfront city when you weren't really planning to just yet. So know that where these barbarian encampments spawn can determine the types of units that they spawn. So cleared outposts, when you do defeat them, they yield gold and era score. If you're playing as Gilgamesh, a goody hut bonus will be granted as well. So that's one thing we won't be able to avoid if we clear a barbarian encampment. We will get that bonus. It'll be like clearing a tribal village. But barbarian units as well, if you clear their outpost, whether it's the scout, and it usually is the scout that does this, or anyone else that survives, will generally find the closest member of your civilization, usually to where the encampment was, but they might also find a city nearby, and they're just going to go kamikaze. They're going to berserk on you until they die because you've killed their outpost. So now we come to the point. We've just seen a scout. Why is that a big deal, and how do you deal with barbarians? Barbarians in Civilization 6 will not attack your cities unless a scout has detected the city and then makes it all the way back to their outpost. So this scout, if it were going to be this one, and there might be another one nearby, would have to come all the way over here to Uruk. And by the way, this is what I was talking about getting too far away from your city. I don't want to go too much farther because we're now 5, 6, 7, or 8 turns, depending on which way I go, away from Uruk with my warrior. Difficult to defend if Uruk suddenly came under attack. But let's say this scout found their way over to Uruk. It doesn't count if they found my unit, but if they found my cities, or any of my cities, you would then see a little exclamation point form over the scout's head, and it would start hightailing it directly back to its camp. If the scout makes it back to its camp, the game is challenging you not to let that scout live. That's what that little exclamation point means. You need to kill me as soon as possible. If you fail to stop the scout, a raiding party of multiple barbarian units, again, if it comes from a cavalry camp, they'll be horse units, will spawn at the camp, and they will head straight for your borders. There might be a variety of units. There might even be archers once a few turns have passed, and barbarians have that ability, so that can be brutal. But that raiding camp will then come to your city and give you a lot of trouble. Imagine that happening more than once, and it can. You can have 2 or 3 barbarian encampments surrounding you if your luck is particularly bad, and all of a sudden you're surrounded by barbarians in the early game because you couldn't stop all of the scouts from getting back to their encampments. You might have stopped 1, you might have even stopped 2, but you couldn't stop that third one, and so you still have a raiding party to deal with. So you want to kill the scout. You want to have an early military that is strong enough and preferably fast enough. Like, for instance, if you have the war cart as Gilgamesh, or if you have other mounted units early on, if you go for mounted units early on, have units that are fast enough to catch scouts and keep them from getting back to their encampment. You can also use your units to cleverly deflect scouts before they find you. So scouts have to see your cities. Again, not your units, but your cities. If you keep them from seeing your cities by using your units to kind of say, no, don't come this way. Don't come this way. Go this way, Mr. Scout. You can do that. If this scout were a little bit closer to me right now, I would definitely try and stand on this side of the river and dare him into going another direction, as opposed to letting him come towards Uruk. Like, if he were at this river, for instance, I would definitely be doing that. But thankfully, he's almost 10 tiles away, which is nice. Yeah, he's 9 tiles away from Uruk. He's not much of a threat. But if he were closer, I would definitely be using this barbarian, or this warrior, to do a little bit of a dance with the barbarian and keep him from getting closer for at least a few turns. You can delay the discovery of your city until you can deal with the camp more directly. You might not know where the camp is right away. We don't know where this barbarian scout's camp is right now. We've got to find it. But we know there's one nearby because there's a scout, and he's headed out to try and see what he can find. So the best way to deal with them is that. It's to locate and destroy the outpost before its scout finds your city, because if you do it before the scout finds the city, there is not a raiding party for you to fight. There is one spearman unit for you to kill. It'll level up and be more powerful later in the game, but at the beginning of the game, it's a spearman. So you also want to be mindful of your early game military so that you can be prepared for the worst case. If multiple barbarians spawn, for instance, you want to have a military that's strong enough to defend against that. And this is the reason that people have raised an alarm about the barbarians in Civilization 6, because they are tougher to deal with than they were in previous entries in the series, and you need to be prepared at all times to deal with the threat that they pose. Absolutely. So, other than that, one thing I will note, actually it's worth bringing this up in this episode since we're talking about barbarians, the current version of the game does not notify you. It doesn't actually show you anything down here like it did when we met Toronto, when a barbarian encampment spawns. There are mods that can allow you to get this notification, but there's no notification that pops up here to show you when a new encampment has appeared. But if an encampment appears in the observed, or I should say in the discovered fog of war, so anywhere in here where we've scouted but we don't currently have visibility, the game will play a kind of tribal chant, and it only plays when a barbarian encampment spawns. So you don't get a direct notification, but the game indirectly notifies you by playing that noise. You have to know what to listen for, and you have to know it when you hear it. But that is the sound of a barbarian encampment spawning. You can then zoom out, and you will be able to see the encampment in the discovered fog of war. If you look closely, you'll be able to see it. So the game will not only tell you with an audio cue, it will show you the location of the encampment if you look for it. So it's a way to kind of get the leg up on where it is and go get that encampment before it becomes a problem. You don't have to worry about constantly hunting them down in the fog of war and not knowing where they are. The game does plenty to let you know that these things are happening. Couple of other notes before I wrap up. Barbarian strength does scale with game difficulty. Okay, so the more difficult setting you're playing on, the more annoying barbarians will be. XP that you can gain from barbarians has a soft cap, and it severely limits XP gain after a unit has gained a certain amount of experience. But there are mods that are available that allow you to play with this as well. And typically on my channel, I do play with those mods because it's nice to feel like you're actually getting a benefit from fighting a lot of early game barbarians, especially if you do get swarmed. The benefit is that you then have a really strong military with multiple promotions if you allow yourself to get a little bit more experience from them. And the vanilla game, the base game, whether you're using Rise and Fall or not, doesn't really let you do that. It caps your experience pretty quickly so that you can't get too strong just from killing barbarians. And frankly, you don't get that strong. It just helps you feel like you've accomplished something and gotten a proportionately stronger military by killing that many barbarians in the beginning. And finally, barbarians can be turned off in the game setup if you prefer not to deal with them at all. But on that note, I will go ahead and wrap this episode here. In the next one, we are going to play a little bit farther, maybe even until religion is unlocked. So we might do a little bit more gameplay in the next episode. But another thing that might give us pause is, well, we're going to get to Code of Laws, so we're going to get to talk about governments and policies for sure. But we might also meet our first civilization. So we're going to talk about what happens when we finish this civic and choosing our first policies. Absolutely, our initial government and policy choices. And we're going to talk not about religion, but we're going to play until that point because we want to have the next episode or set of episodes start to talk about that. But we also, again, very soon are going to meet a neighbor, I imagine. And when we get to that point, we're going to have to talk about what diplomatic interaction between civilizations looks like in those first turns and the kinds of things you can do and what has positive or negative ramifications in addition to what we've already talked about with, say, how you encounter them, what unit you encounter them with, what are some of the other things that can happen. And we'll have to see how that plays out. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to follow along. New episodes are coming out every other day at 10 a.m. U.S. Eastern Time. Comments are always welcome. Let me know what you think, and I will see you next time.